Let's talk equipment or no equipment when producing compost on your homestead. Hi, this is Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead. I get questions here and there about composting leaves. You'll see up on the website I have cattle panels turned around into a loop, and I can put about 2.5 cubic yards of leaves in this. Now, I get leaves from all my neighbors. I get leaves from my own yard. In fact, the design of my yard collects leaves in certain areas where I just go scoop them up and put them in the bin. Now, a lot of folks ask, should we shred the leaves? Should we turn the leaves? Should we do anything with the leaves? Well, there is a system that I use here that will get me compost in 28 days. In fact, it's the Berkeley Hot Composting System, and we adapted it for the volume. As you can see, it's about 2.5 cubic yards of leaves, which is plenty of volume in order to get a nice hot composted pile. But leaves alone do not produce compost. Now, you can mound these leaves in a ring and allow them to sit for about 2 years, and you will end up with what's called leaf mold. It's a great additive. You can sift it out and use it to add to potting mix to retain moisture. You can put it around trees that need acidic soil. But leaves alone will be very acidic, and they will not break down much at all in a short period of time. And when you have a temperate climate where you have actual seasonal variance, I like to get the snow mixed in with that over the winter. I like to mix in any of the lawn clippings, for example, during the mow seasons. I like to get that mow done right before anything goes to seed. So we're constantly getting a nice clean mow from tall grass. If you got my program, it's year-round green. I show you how in a temperate climate you can have grass or a lawn that actually produces biomass that you can use in your composting. Now, the biomass I get also comes from the neighbor's cuttings. I get tree trimming, vegetable scraps, just about everything. So I layer that in my pile and turn that pile every week. Now, I don't actually turn the pile. The kid down the street turns the pile for a couple bucks, and it takes him about 30 minutes. He's probably making about $20 an hour turning a compost pile, but he turns the pile every week and usually incorporates the grass clippings because he's also mowing the grass. But I might end up with a bunch of comfrey put in there. I might end up with a bunch of wood chips or shredded materials if the pile's too wet. You want to turn that pile every week or so, and then when it's hot, as soon as it hits about 150 degrees, let it sit for 2 to 3 days at that temperature. When the temperature starts coming down, then you turn the pile again. And that oxygen is going to revitalize the microbes that are in that pile. Because see, here's what happens. And we're going to get to the machine or no machine. But a properly managed compost pile, like when we talk about Compost Made Easy, and I've got that program that I teach this, a properly managed compost pile is a war. It is billions and billions of microbes that go from aerobic to anaerobic and fight each other. And you may not have known this, but anaerobic bacteria that grows without oxygen, is the favorite food of bacteria that grows with oxygen, aerobic. Now, there's other factors in there like minerals and lignin and different types of things that are in there. You could also have a pile that is a fungal compost, which leaves are good at that. You can turn it into a fungal mix for trees, or you can turn it into a microbial or bacterial type of mix for your garden soil. Either way, when you turn the pile, there's this rush of oxygen, which is just what your aerobic bacteria needs to get all excited and get their war drums going and going after the aerobic bacteria, which you don't want. An anaerobic bacteria, a bacteria with oxygen, is not harmful to humans. But if you keep a pile and don't turn it, and you layer those leaves up and you don't turn it, it could get too wet. It could end up with a smell, beyond a musty smell, but just a really uncomfortable smell, especially if you're incorporating other things in it. Now, you can layer the compost pile and just keep layering it and keep your carbon and green balance good, and it will break down, but it'll take about 2 years, and we don't want that. So a lot of folks ask, do I get equipment? Do I get a mulcher? Do I get a shredder? Because if you do shred those leaves down, they'll break down in about a year and turn into leaf mold. And then in 2 years, they're completely compost. Because the smaller particle size has more surface area, and these bacteria live on the surface area. See, that's why I had to explain the whole bacteria battle, because if I didn't explain the life and death of the bacteria, you wouldn't understand that more surface area is actually better. But it's just one more piece of equipment you've got to maintain. I get wood chips from a tree services company. They've got a very big shredder. Very big shredders are highly efficient. However, a little small 2-cylinder, 4-cylinder shredder that you might have at your house is going to spend 90% of its time in your garage or in your shed taking up space. I'd rather use nature and leverage bacterial activity, microbial activity, the whole soil food web to turn that 2.5 cubic yards of material into rich, thick, beautiful compost. Now, what do we do here? Well, you can get the program Compost Made Easy for the details, but let me give you a quick summary. We actually add a biochar. We inoculate the pile with liquid fertilizer that we've created through a fermentation process here. We add sometimes we'll add fertilizer to it. So sometimes a neighbor will call over and he'll say, look, I got a bag of 10-10-10 and it's got wet. Do you want it? I will take the bag of 10-10-10. I will not apply it to the garden. We're strictly organic here, but I will use it over time. And a bag of 10-10-10 can last like 2 years. I'll use it over time and maybe put a cup of it in each compost turn. So I'll sprinkle it over the compost and turn it to feed it nitrogen, because at my site, I get about 8 to 10 cubic yards of leaves from the neighbors, and I don't have a lot of green material to work with. So I think I'm still milking a bag of 10-10-10 from 2 years ago that the neighbor gave me. I just basically put it in a bucket and I just scoop some out each time we turn the piles. Now we turn the piles, we also add water because we have, while it's a temperate climate, we have wet winters, our summers can be super hot. And I want compost year round because I'm sifting the compost for my nursery areas. I'm using compost as a top dressing in the garden beds. I'm going through all of this need. I'm literally building soil at 5 to 10 cubic yards at a time. That's why I describe this system as a farm scale or a homestead scale. And this is something you can do in the back of your estate, the back of your property, and you can have 4 or 5 of these rings set up. I think I have 2 active rings right now. Again, it's a cattle panel turned around, and we use carabiners so that we can pop that panel open and then easily turn it with a pitchfork. Another reason is you don't want to get equipment is because of the noise. I personally am not very tolerant of noise. And if you've ever had neighbors busting out their little leaf blowers and their mowers and all that crap at like 8 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday when you're trying to chill and relax, it's just annoying. I don't want to do that to my neighbors, so I don't bother with big equipment like that. Now, I do have a BCS tractor that I'll make sure we use between 10 a.m. and about 6 p.m. I restrict the use to that area because I'm in an urban space. But even then, I'd rather have an implement to add to the tractor if I was going to shred branches and stuff as well. But to shred leaves alone, even the little electrical system, it just isn't worth your time, because you can break down a compost pile in 14 days if you turn it using the cycle that I described. So you create a compost pile, a good balance of greens and browns, that's carbon and nitrogen. Then you wait till the pile gets to 150 degrees, let it sit for 2 or 3 days at 150 degrees, and that usually will get there in a day. Then you turn it again. If you keep doing that until the compost is soil, it'll be soil in 14 days. There is really no need to mechanically grind it down so that you can have soil in 14 days. Some subscribers argue that the equipment helps them do the job faster. Well, it might make the job go faster, but here's what I'm looking at from a energy inputs and outputs perspective. First off, I'm in the business of profits. I'm in the business of putting in a small amount of materials and getting a large amount of results. So if I'm going to go buy a piece of equipment and spend $300, get a used shredder. My neighbor's been talking about he wants me to get a used shredder. He used to have a shredder. It was great. He wants me to get a used shredder so we can use it as a community shredder. But I already showed them like small branches. You can mound those into brush piles and then bury them with wood chips and then bury that with soil. And in a temperate climate, you have a hugelkultur. And in about a year, that thing will grow all kinds of stuff. Now, hugel will not magically work right away because it sucks up a lot of nitrogen. But it does work as a great brush pile, which is small bird habitat. And the brush pile's done the right way, that thing's going to break down within a year in this particular climate. So I don't really need a shredder or a chipper to chip small brush materials, again, because I'm mounding them in rows for bird habitat, and I've got a system in place to turn that into soil itself. If you compost the right way, you can compost sticks. I've composted 10-pound fish. I've composted a possum. I've composted quite a few things, and I'm confident that you can in 2.5 cubic yards, you can turn a lot of materials into soil. Now you're going to have challenges. Shredding the materials would help you break down the materials faster with fewer inputs. But here's the problem. You're going to end up with broken down leaves, small particle sized leaves that will seem like okay soil, but it's really just smaller leaves. So you don't have the biological activity that turns those leaves into actual compost that's nutritionally strong, biologically strong, that feeds the soil. You end up having basically shredded materials, but even in the garden, I do a lot of chop and drop. I can chop it with a machete really quick in the garden and just leave it on the ground, put straw over it, and start planting my next crop. I don't have to shred it into tiny materials, haul it across the yard into a composter, and then turn it a bunch of times. Our bulk composting here is primarily, like we did 2,500 pounds of coffee grounds in a year. That mixed with leaves, and that mixed with general yard waste, usually the bag off the mower, turned into about 8 cubic yards of compost, which we then hauled. I figure it's bad enough to have to haul the compost from a giant pile of compost that I'm not going to carry extra stuff to put into it. And then the piece of equipment is just really that extra stuff. Now, it's also maintenance that you need to do. It's also space in your garage or your shed that's going to be taken up. And if you have maybe a community garden and you choose to get a shredder for like a shred day at a community garden, maybe that's something different because you have limited space. Maybe you're going to rent a shredder periodically or a chipper or a mulcher periodically. Maybe that's okay, but you're still, from an energy inputs and outputs, you might be reducing the amount of time it takes, but you're increasing the cost of that pile. I'd rather put that money on the kid down the street turning the pile. I'd rather put that money on better amendments if necessary. But really, if you have a good composting system in place, amendments is really not all that necessary. And I process enough organic waste from I am in an urban space. I process enough organic waste that I'm turning that soil into those leaves into soil in about 28 days, 90 days or so. I'm getting a usable product. It'll cook down pretty quick, and it cooks down without evaporating a lot of the material or gasifying a lot of the material. Bottom line is, mulcher, chipper, shredder, all that stuff. Maybe it's okay if you've got a community garden and you're sharing the equipment. Maybe it's okay if you own a landscaping company and people are paying you to shred their stuff. But ultimately, from an energy audit perspective, it's not really necessary. I can get billions of microbes to do the work for me, and I don't have to break down leaves. They'll eat that stuff up in 14 days, and it looks the same as if I shredded it. It's easy to do. If you have questions about composting, if you have questions about equipment for a small farm, homestead, or estate, if you have questions about anything related to these podcasts, visit me at www.prosperityhomestead.org. I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead. We help affluent homeowners, estate owners, and small farm holding folks get more productivity, create greater prosperity through ecologically sound methods that they just simply work with nature. They simply work with nature. And you can transform 10, 20, 30 cubic yards of leaves into soil without a mulcher or a shredder. Now, again, folks, not to go tangential here, if you've got 20 yards of leaves, by the way, you might need a tractor to turn it to go a little faster. or an army of kids. Anyway, write with your questions. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead.